So the McCall and Askoff text discusses 5 ways in which disabled people may have been regarded in the period in which this text was written. Of course, it's a time very much removed from where we are. Some of the attitudes actually seem very familiar to me, attitudes that might be there even today. Maybe we're well-meaning. By we, I mean the collective we, not you or not me, but just the collective we. But so McCall and Askoff discuss these kind of 5 ways to think about people with disabilities. And I think that's where this academic article kind of helps with us as we approach this particular text and then maybe apply it beyond the confines of where McCall and Askoff are going, but to other directions as well. So maybe this person is a victim. Maybe this person is marginalized. Maybe this person is sinful. Maybe this disability or this illness is a test. Maybe it's a result of some imperfection. All those things are kind of possible, and I think the value of the McCall and Askoff text is that it kind of asks the question, both directly and subtly throughout, how are we to think about disability? Are we making assumptions that disability bad, ability, or those of us that can walk or are not sick or chronically sick or something right now, that's good? I think these are really important questions. I think they're really good questions, especially for people of faith who, when their friends or family members are going through difficulty or sickness or weakness, you want to pray for them. You want them to get better. And certainly there's warrant for that in the New Testament and in the Old Testament as well. But does that, in the process of that, does that cause some unintended consequences? One of the ones in which I have seen a lot in kind of common public religion is this idea that if something bad happens to you, it's because you did something wrong. And that's really distasteful to me. It may be the case that I didn't do something right and there's some consequence to that. That's true. That's true. I mean, if I squander my money, I'm not going to have anything to retire on. Or if I squander my money, if there's an emergency that comes up, I'm not going to be able to address that emergency when otherwise I would have been able to. That's all true. If I don't take care of myself, if I eat 4 pounds of red meat a day and drink nothing but beer and wine, there may be some rather terrible impacts to my diet. Or if I eat only sweets, what happens to my teeth? Well, and to tell you the truth, I've always had bad teeth, and I, ate a lot of sweets when I was a kid. So I am reaping the reward of my actions. Reward I use tongue in cheek, but that whole idea is something that's problematic for me, and in terms of sin equals judgment or bad behavior equals judgment from God. These are things that are above my pay grade. I don't pretend to know how and when God does what God does with my bad behavior. In fact, to be truthful, one can make the argument that there are ever so many people that don't seem to be suffering for any ill consequences of bad behavior. And what do you do with that? If we were to use that measure, then everybody that's rich and has everything that they want and is in health, then these are all the righteous people, and it's only those who are poor or who are weak or sick, they're the unrighteous. And that just doesn't work. It doesn't work in the New Testament. It doesn't work in the Old Testament. In fact, the disciples of Jesus seem to be struggling with that concept. And Jesus says it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle. And there will be some of you that have heard in churches that the needle is some kind of gate. You would offload your camel and the camel would scoot through on its on its knees, and then you'd bring the goods through, and then you'd upload the goods back onto the camel, and then you'd go by your merry way. That was some gate in Jerusalem. Well, it probably was, but it was probably dated to the 8th century after Christ. So that would not have been what Jesus was talking about. What Jesus was talking about was a needle, a sewing needle, that I used a couple of weeks ago to sew a button back on my pants. A needle and a camel going through that. Now, can that happen? No, it can't happen. Jesus says it's easier for that to happen than it is for a rich man to get into heaven. And so how do his disciples respond to that? They say, then who can be saved? If the rich don't make it, then who can make it? And Jesus says, this is why I'm here, so that you can kind of help, you can figure that stuff out. Now I'm paraphrasing, of course, but that is their response. Then who can be saved? And Jesus points it out. Yes, you're on the right track. Now you're starting to get it. Even though you don't get it, you're now seeing the question. You're starting to get it. And so I don't like this kind of theology, because I think Jesus rejects it. This kind of theology that every time there's a sin, that results in some kind of malady or poverty or whatever. I think rich and poor alike, we find a way to violate these two great commandments, to love God and love others around us, right? And so in very many ways, we're all deserving of punishment, and we're all equally deserving of God's favor. So this kind of mentality doesn't necessarily work. And I think one of the other things it does is it creates a context that's, obviously I very much had problems with this idea. It creates a context wherein people feel guilty. I didn't believe enough, I didn't give enough, I didn't do enough, and thus God is judging me. One of the other things that I have students that talk about every now and then is that everything happens for a reason, almost as if what I hear by that is God's making all this bad stuff happen to me. Why? That's just not the picture I get as I read the Old and New Testament. Do I get the idea that God redeems things? Yeah, I get that idea, but that God is directly involved in every bad thing that happens to me or every good thing that happens to me. It's a little bit more difficult to nail down when we kind of dig down into the details. So that's just one reflection on the McCall and Askoff text. I think when you go through these other ideas that they raise, I think we see a context in which disability, sickness, illness, it can be looked at as bad. It's bad in the sense that it's uncomfortable for us when we suffer with those things and when our friends suffer with those things. At the same time, let's make sure that we're not forcing some kind of idea on the text that isn't really there. And if it's not there, then how do we deal with these things? How do we take this New Testament text or Old Testament text and apply it to issues of illness, sickness, and then advocacy for patients? So we'll wrap up with the next text, or with the text. I'm talking so much about text, with the next video, and that should be it for the week.